Okay, so now let's go to a very different architect, one who is our contemporary, and let's see how we can accommodate him after Luis Barragan in our presentation, because Mark Foster Gage is scandalous even in a different kind of context. But in this one, following Luis Barragan, he becomes almost unacceptable. So just a second. First, let's look at this image from a book, Mark Foster Gage, Projects and Provocations. And yes, the provocations had to come together with the word projects. This is for a tower he proposed for New York City, a tower which we are not yet ready to build in this way. But yes, a very polemical kind of tower. And he's a professor, I don't know, professor, associate, or anyway, he was teaching for many years at Yale University, although he's still young. And I guess Yale University is open to different kind of architectural discourses. This is the man, and he's a very articulate man, and very, very capable of debating and explaining ideas and so on. And again, I suggest to you, you watch that video on YouTube where he debates violently at times with Patrick Schumacher. This is the man, Mark Foster Gage. An outfit for Lady Gaga, quite appropriately, I mean, because there is some kind of connection, aesthetical connection, I would say, between his work and Lady Gaga. He's moving between various fields, actually, having to do with art, with architecture, with stage design, and so on. Interesting shoes for Lady Gaga, who herself knows something about design. But again, we come after Luis Barragan, and now we are dealing with a very different kind of architect who lives, is part of our time. Those who do not like theatrics, those who do not love anything having to do with Baroque mentalities or Baroque manifestations, probably would find his work very, questionable or even disturbing. But it is interesting that today, on one hand, we had, when I say today, I refer to, to the present, a larger present, if you want. We have minimalism, but we also have the very, very exotic manifestations of Baroque mentality. And they coexist. Now, this is a house on this place on an island, I guess. It's a project. But try to compare it with what we just saw by Luis Barragan. It's amazing in a way that the architect turns his back on that simplicity that Barragan advocated and tries to find expressions of emotions in a very different way. It will take some time until he builds in this way, of course. But if it was built, I would say that this would not be a structure or a building that would leave us indifferent. One thing is for certain, Gage would not agree with Luis Barragan that architecture is supposed to, bring in mystery and serenity. Again, try to compare this interior with the interior of some of the houses that we saw by Luis Barragan. And look at the plan. Look at the walls, contorted as they are and thick as they are, here and there. It's a very different kind of architecture. Now, Nicola Formichetti's store in Tokyo and Sao Paulo, he, you know, again, this sort of thing coming after Luis Barragan seems almost implausible. But he is a radical architect, and we live in radical times. A little bit, you know, humbled by, you know, the climate change and the pandemic. Is he innocent? I don't know. I mean, to what extent is anyone truly innocent? But he's an interesting voice, so to speak, in today's architectural context. And again, I think it's important to listen to him, and he knows a lot about architecture, and he's able to express himself very emphatically and coherently. Now, I don't know about this parallel between Michelangelo and what he did here on the right. I find it provocative, to say the least. But this is the brave new world. Let's not forget this, where anything goes. Minion, Yale Seminary Research. So this is a project he did together with his students. Look at this sort of thing, you know, it's almost alarming, although we see here fragments of something that Gaetano Pesce did, you know, 40, 50 years ago. It's possible, you know, it's possible to do an architecture which welcomes back figuration and narration even. Well, this is more like sculpture than architecture, but it is an architect who works with the students in architecture at Yale to do these things. They experiment. They are not happy with the déjà vu. They are not happy with just following the mystery and serenity of Luis Barragan. They search for something else. And that something else might have some validity, remains to be seen. We are going to see soon his outrageous and audacious proposal for the Guggenheim Museum in Helsinki, probably one of the most outrageous projects done in the past years. Here are the Yale students, kind of happy working with a robot. Maybe too happy. Now, I was just mentioning the Helsinki Guggenheim Museum, and here it is. If you can believe it, that's the building. That's the building proposed about, I don't know, around 20 years after Luis Barragan died. 20, 23, 25 years at the most after Barragan died. We can wonder what did Barragan, what would have been his opinion if he saw this project. You know, look at a fragment of the facade of the building. You know, this is not what he did, but it's very similar to what he did if it was, you know, colored. It's a crazy facade. Sorry for the non-academic language, This would be the plan of the museum, and very symmetrical, perfectly symmetrical, but the physical presence of the building would have perplexed even the most arduous member of l'École des Beaux-Arts. In a way, it's an architectural monster. One could even interpret it as a commentary on what a museum is. I mean, after all, what is a museum? A museum is a gathering, a collecting of many objects brought together in a, some kind of an unending quest for having more and more and more. And but it's still an alarming building. I wish I had more pictures with it, but I think we already saw maybe enough. Anyway, Nicola Formichetti's store in New York City, this one he built, and it's the same psychedelic architecture connected kind of with Lady Gaga, and fragmented and crazy and colorful and reflective. It's difficult not to become dizzy in such an environment, but that's what he aimed at. Again, in complete opposition with Luis Barragan, if we are to, talk about them together. If it didn't happen that Barragan died on the very day when Gage was born 15 years earlier, I would not have talked about both today. But I think the question is a valid one. How come the two architects, almost contemporary, and actually for 15 years contemporary, would build in such opposite ways, or wish to build, because Gage didn't build so much yet. He's in quest for mystery as well, but a different kind of mystery. Certainly not serenity. These are shards. These are fragments of a broken geometry. We cannot have the serenity of Luis Barragan in today's world. I don't think we can. It's possible Luis Barragan would have said that Gage failed in his attempt to create architecture. Automotive display facility, essentially a vertical parking, but a most unusual parking, that's for sure. It's a monument to Its Majesty, the car. And this is kind of paradoxical because, his architecture in its sculpturalism doesn't really seem to accommodate easily in its, essence, what the car is. So, the car has a modernity which somehow his architecture does not have or wants to get rid of. Yes, this structure is modern, it's high-end capitalistic modernity, but you know, these cars are, you know, they are static. They are just reduced to silence in a way. They are just objects for contemplation, but a very different kind of contemplation from the one we witnessed or we imagined looking at the works of Luis Barragan. The architecture of Mark Foster Gage is an architecture that has pharaonic connotations, has imperial connotations, even although his professed ideals seem to point in the direction of democracy. Anyway, it's also maybe some pessimism at work here. You know, this kind of monument in the desert, maybe it's a sarcastic statement about, you know, where the cars become objects for, you know, as I said, contemplation. For in a museum, where there are no highways here to be seen, there are no streets, it's just this tower, very solitary and hermetic and enigmatic, containing, you know, the objects of desire of modernity, to run, run, and run again. In essence, we have cars stacked one above the other, vertically. They are reduced to inactivity. Perhaps Gage, less confident about a very mobile future, created a memorial for the dying car, maybe. And now a concert hall, a most unusual kind, a project again. Yale University is not a very, you know, cutting edge in the sense of avant-garde school. I mean, yes, Louis Kahn taught there, but it's a rather, you know, it's a very good school, but it's a school which is not, as far as I know, immensely adventurous. But the fact that he teaches there says something that the school is, you know, accommodating even uncomfortable positions or voices. Jeannie Geng told me, who also taught at Yale University, that students at Yale, she wrote to me this maybe 15 years ago. She said, students at Yale University can do in a split of a second, in a split second, a building, you know, digitally, or some kind of a, you know, physical structure. They are extremely well, I mean, they are very knowledgeable about the latest softwares and programs and so on. And you see that Mark Gage also is manipulating here an architecture of a certain complexity with ease and so on. Something you cannot easily do, you know, with traditional means of representation. No way. Metropole Hotel, you know, I'm, to be honest with you, I am uncomfortable with this kind of architecture because it's displaying and you know, a crazed opulence. And you know, it's very possible that the pandemic is tempering us, to say the least. Not to speak about climate change and other things. But on the other hand, he's not the only architect who tries to bring back some kind of a sculpturalness to the building. But the building otherwise is rather conventional and it's not radical. Now the National Center for Science, I mean, maybe I should not leave so quickly. But I still think this building, if you look at the plan, and if you look even at the, it's an opulent building, which if you remove these things, which themselves are rather, in my opinion, questionable from an artistic point of view, you get a very commercial and shiny and gold-like structure, which is essentially celebrating the old demons of high capitalism. So, the radical aspects of this architecture are actually dwarfed by conventionalism, in my opinion. And the plan kind of shows it. This is a very conventional plan. It's nothing, dramatically new or radical about it. But perhaps the idea to bring back some sculpturalness to the building is not a bad one or an unnecessary one. Now, the National Center for Science and Innovation of Lithuania, a project, massive, monumental. Gun seems to be the myth of science, of innovation, being light, with light structure, light-hearted, light everything. Here is, this mausoleum-like architecture with the purpose of serving science and innovation. What innovation? Here we see more archaeology in a way. This is almost an imperial architecture. Anyway, I guess progressivism ended up into something else. This is an architecture which seems to claim a monarch. Is science that monarch? Is possible. It's a massive, heavy architecture. Is this a scientist, puzzled as he is? Maybe. Or just a visitor into the Center for Science and Innovation after the scientists left in a hurry, rather panicked. It's possible. Yes, there is here the prospect or the possibility of something, sublime, but I don't know. It seems to be an architecture which doesn't need man. So very different from Richard's laboratories by Louis Kahn that he built in, I think, in 1955 or so in Philadelphia. The plan, though, in its movement, unsettles things. But somehow I thought when I was looking at these pictures again, that somehow in his work is this an unexpected and uncomfortable meeting between the avant-garde and classicism, or even between archaeology and I don't know if I can use the word avant-garde. That is, if the arrière-garde can cooperate with the avant-garde and create some kind of a different guard. Also, thinking about the avant-garde, we only think about the front and the back. The front being the avant-garde and the back being the arrière-garde. But what about the sides? That's why once I thought about the peri-garde, meaning the guard at the periphery, not just in the front and not just in the back, but all around, so to speak. Otherwise, despite the splendid, Ur-architecture almost, there is this Arcadian landscape. And in a way, they are the two sides of the same coin, perhaps. It remains to be seen. But we see the landscape and the landscape architect coming back in very different ways than Luis Barragan showed us. And here we also have the mist, of course, because because the longing for mystery needs some mist or mistiness, especially in present days when we cannot conceive of a quiet, reticent, subdued mystery. Now, House in a Field, a Harvard project, surface complexity, layered depth, and rich materiality provide an alternative to blankness or monolithic. Here, ornamental agency claims the space itself, every single wall, floor, and ceiling. Spatial ornamentation fosters intimate rather than indifferent engagement with the home through controlled articulation, drawing one into the visual sensuousness of its unfolding depths. House in a Field is a series of insertions as vertically staggered living spaces, catalyzed by visual richness, prompting the inhabitant to intimately move amongst the visceral immediacy of spatial ornament, the tactile personality of form, its articulated surface combats the cold uniformity of standardization. We notice the word ornament at least 3 times. Indeed, ornament is coming back to architecture. And those who think that can continue to talk about structure in the absence of ornament today are outmoded. So this is a house he did with his students at Harvard. Yes, there is a cubicle work here, but there is also, because of the ornament, more. Goodbye, Luis Barragan. From his interiors to this interior is a very long distance indeed. And actually didn't pass too many years, Luis Barragan died in 1988, and these projects were done maybe 5 years ago or so. So maybe, I don't know, 25 years later after Luis Barragan died. It's a return to some kind of a cave or cave-like configuration. We still have geometry, but we have monumentality, and we have certain complexity of forms and viscerality. This is, I would describe it now spontaneously, I don't know how correctly, as some kind of, archetypal or archetype. Well, even that maybe archetypal, that's still, archaic, rather archaic, an archaic still. Interesting combination between the steel and an archaic aesthetics or architecture. And now we arrive at his probably best known project, the one that, in fact, we end with the beginning, the one on the cover of that book that I showed at the very beginning, West 57th Street Residential Tower. We see here the Empire State Building, and this is the proposal by Mark Foster Gage. I mean, the scale is unbelievable. I mean, look at this balcony here. Look at the silhouettes, the human silhouettes. I think this is the tower by Rafael Moneo. Anyway, he proposed this one, Mark Foster Gage. And indeed, figuration and sculpture and ornamentation, they are all back in a giant display of being hungry to return. Now, of course, this project was done before the issue of sustainability. This this building, if built, would consume unbelievable resources and unbelievable expenses. It would be the very opposite of what we understand by a sustainable building. But on the other hand, when you think that there is a huge number of people who have no work, why not employ the hands and the minds and the hearts and the talent sometimes and the knowledge other times or the same time of these many people and bring back to architecture something that the founder of the Bauhaus, Walter Gropius, was advocating too in his manifesto. Painters, sculptors, architects working together for the building. So in this sense, what he proposes, Mark Foster Gage, is not as crazy as we might think it might be. No, it's just that it's needed a different mentality, a different understanding or conception about what we want to do. And, for the moment, we don't seem to be ready for something like this. Is this the solution to the future? I'm not sure about it, because again, we are dealing here with a pharaonic effort. And in essence, what is it serving? Somehow looking at this, I feel tempted to remember Hans Meyer, the second director of the Bauhaus, who had social concerns and ethical concerns. But maybe there is room on this earth still, maybe I'm not sure, for both attitudes. But I do think that an attempt to bring together the painters, the sculptors, the architects, and other artists for the making of the building is not a bad idea. Thank you.